All right, welcome to Totally Rewarding Chats. We have Ben Frost here, who I've known for ever, we'll just say that, a long time. And welcome as always with Mr. Ryman. How are you?
I'm doing well. Ben, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Ben's coming from the UK. And so that we don't screw it up, to give us a start, give us your bio and of course, go through all the companies that you've worked at. But while you're doing that, just to make sure it's a little bit longer than that, give us the roles you've had.
Okay, so yeah, the company's part's quite quick. I joined the Hay Group business in 1999, so 27 years ago. Did 15 or 16 years there, and then 10 years ago, at the end of 2015, that Hay Group was acquired by Korn Ferry, and here I still am. So 27 years and counting. But I've done a number of roles in that time. So for the first 7 or 8 years, I was in the reward benchmark data business, building those comp databases globally, selling them, consulting around the data. Then I jumped into a global product management role for about 10 years. So I was in that role when Korn Ferry acquired Hay. And I was one of the people who understood sort of a piece of the jigsaw of all the content that was being assembled in Korn Ferry. And so I was one of a group of people that was sort of locked in a room and told to figure out how all this stuff would fit together. So that was in about 2016, 2017. And since then, my role has been a solution architect. So I work across all of Korn Ferry's content, all the tools that bring that to life, all the consulting capability we put around it. But more recently, lots on pay transparency, which has come back into fashion in a big way. So back to home territory more recently.
Which I know is, that's what we'll get to. And the reason we wanted to bring you on is to try to get some Europeans in, so see what's actually going on, so that, over there. Before we get started, we have to do the speed round as we go. I won't ask you who your favorite team is, because you have already made a quality life selection and are a Gunners fan.
Yes. You and I both Arsenal fans. Normally, you'd say it's a life sentence. Each summer, you kind of go again. There's no chance of parole on this one either. But actually, life's looking pretty good at the moment.
As of right now, knock on the touch wood thing. Leave it be for right now.
Yep.
And now I have to chime in on this. This sort of dawned on me, right? For those listening or watching who have no idea what Sean and Ben are talking about, right? So this is sort of the British Premier League, sort of soccer, football, as they call it around the world. And Arsenal is sort of like, it's kind of like picking the Yankees back in like 2005. Let's be honest, right? Like they kind of always win,
no.
right?
That's like City. Well, first of all, City and the Yankees are together. It was Man U. I will say I became a fan. When's the last time they won the league, Ben?
Over 20 years ago, 2004. Yeah.
Yeah. So right before, in the late 90s, so I've had one successful time that I watched. I actually became an Arsenal fan because at the time someone took me to a match, watch, and actually back then their manager, a guy named Arsene Wenger, he would rather lose 5-4 than win 1-0. And so as an American, it was like, okay, this is more fun to watch this team than other teams, even if we lose. And I will say, from a bandwagon standpoint, then we were good. And then there was a period we were not recently. So actually watching people who have been around for a long time, there was a thing. I would consider the Yankees, when you say that, more of a City recently, where they bought in. Man U for a long time, right? Was kind of like the evil empire, although they've solved that themselves. They've not been as good. But it is one of the big clubs. So when you think about, to your point, Paul, like, it is one of the bigger.
That was more my point, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the passion, right? This is the thing that I think Americans in particular don't understand about Premier League football is, like, if you're an Arsenal fan, people love you or hate you immediately. Like, there's a club that, like, you joined, right? And I went to a Man City Man U game back in 2004 or something like that, and I learned the same thing. Like, they're like, that's a war, and I'm a Chicagoan, right? So Bears Packers is sort of like our equivalent of that, right? And it's the same concept. I just wanted to make sure those that don't know anything of what.
Yeah, what's really interesting is in the UK, it can really be that way. So I was lucky enough, now it's a month or so ago, to go up to Birmingham to watch the Aston Villa Arsenal match, I know, sad moment of silence, Ben, for that match. But when you travel, much different than the U.S., is they put you in this pie, as I call it, in the stadium, with security guards on both sides, and you stay in your pie. And depending on the match, I will say Ben and I traveled, the farthest I've ever traveled to watch a sporting match and lose is with Ben. We went to Munich one time, and we had to wait like before we could leave after the match so that the stadium could clear and we could safely depart. And that was in Germany, which is not that bad. And so it is very divisive that way.
The passion level is higher than anything you've seen if you're just an American sport watcher. Like my son can be friends with the Packers
outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah,
everyone should go watch a Premier League match. It's like in Boston, Sweet Caroline, or some of these others. It's all game, and it is just everyone should go once. You don't even have to like it. You just have to, even if your understanding of soccer is if it goes in the net, good. If it goes in the other net, bad. The atmosphere is actually really really cool, and it's just a cool thing to do. And then of course you get crazy like traveling to go see them and other stuff. That's a whole new thing.
Anyway, didn't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but I realized
there's
a lot of people that
otherwise
be like,
Ben and I'll pawn off into the transfer windows coming and stuff right as we
right.
go.
Oh, we could do it.
Like,
when
you call it
on this.
You use the word gunners. People were like, what are they talking about? Like, I didn't realize it was that kind of show. So anyway,
all
right.
that's
going.
True.
Keep going.
So, are you a coffee or tea person, Ben?
Unusually for a Brit, neither. I don't do either really. Take my caffeine cold. Usually have a can of Diet Coke on the go. So yeah, unusually for a Brit. I do not like tea. I don't really like coffee either. So neither.
We'll stay with the football or soccer theme. Favorite, because I know Ben travels way more than I do actually for soccer. Favorite stadium you've been to? Pitch as it may be.
Well, I give two answers to that. For soccer, the Madrid stadium, the Real Madrid stadium, which has recently gotten a bit of a facelift, is very very impressive. Sort of front of house, especially one of the great places to sort of watch the game. And then another one. I mean, I was very lucky 10 years or so ago to go to Fenway for baseball, which was very reminiscent of some of the older kind of UK soccer stadiums. Obviously, lots of those have been rebuilt recently, but there are still some sort of very traditional kind of old stadiums. So Fenway was a great example of that. Really enjoyed going there.
Yeah, I tell people all the time. Obviously, go see Arsenal because as we chant, there's the greatest team in the world. But Queen's Park is the other one. To your point, in London, Queen's Park Rangers Stadium, built in 1888. Looks and feels like it was built in 1888 still. You feel as safe as it was built in 1888 still, but it has that feel. So I totally get that answer, Ben, from like having that old school feel. But yeah, I tell people go to Queen's Park, and that's a couple thousand person. You really get the feel of local soccer in the city. The third question is always: are you have a weekend away? You've been given a weekend away. Would you go somewhere posh or would you go rough it in the woods?
I'd go somewhere posh for a weekend, and I'd say I'm more of a city kind of dweller than a countryside guy as well. So yeah, definitely somewhere posh and probably in or close to a thriving sort of city.
And more of a not a beach resort, more of a like where the action is sort of the vibe I'm hearing there.
Well, yeah, Barcelona does a good bit of both, right?
Yeah.
The city and beach.
Sure. There you go.
Your favorite band. So Ben is, I know now that I'm the well, I guess I love music, but Paul's a musician. So your favorite band, because you listen to a tremendous amount of music.
Yeah, I do. So probably, I guess the kind of band of my adult life is probably Oasis, where again, really very lucky to sort of see them. I was 17 and saw them before they had any music out at all, and then was sort of on that journey as they were unknown and went to huge, imploded, and then came back again this last year. So again, was very lucky to go and scratch the itch once more in 2025.
So you saw them last year.
Yeah, saw the first show back, which was always a bit of a well, hopefully a low risk thing. We were never sure if there was going to be a first show back, or if there was, would there be a second show back? So yeah, took the low risk option and went for the first one.
Okay.
Smart.
And the last question, are you a crunchy or creamy peanut butter person?
So like tea and coffee, not really either. But if you had a gun to my head, I'd go for crunchy.
It's a very American thing. Like I've noticed over the years when I have that question on there, and I don't want to change it because then they can say no. But generally, you don't want to start with "Do you like it?" and have the follow. But generally, outside the U.S., they're kind of like, and I think last time I was over there because I eat a lot of peanut butter actually, and there's always it makes selection easy when you go to the UK. There's like two jars, a crunchy and a creamy. There's no other brands. Whereas in America, it's like a half an aisle of peanut butters.
Yeah, exactly.
So the important stuff. So the reason we brought you on, EU PTV 5 months away ish, give or take, less probably by the time we drop this. You've been in the middle of it, so I'll open it up really broad to start. Like, where do you see companies at right now in this process, and what's kind of the general feel right now with it a few months away?
Panic may be overstating, but there's a lot of work to do. There are probably two types of companies out there at the moment. Ones who realise that there is a lot of work to do between now and then, and those who haven't quite realised that yet. There's probably no third way. I think there's no one that really doesn't have work to do. They either realise it or they don't. It's something that, our phone is, again, in January, starting to ring again. It's tends to be something that people have sort of put off until after the holidays. So we had, a lot of interest in September as people came back from their summer holidays to say, this is something I'll start to get to grips with after the summer holidays. And then now again in January, it's when I've come back after the new year, we really need to get on top of this. So yeah, I would say the general theme: most people have a lot of work to do, and they either realise that or they don't.
What's the work that they have to do? It's kind of interesting because there's, when we've talked and had other people on, there's always like, really just getting your shit together, like on jobs and categories and data. There's analysis, there's remediation. Like, where are they, like in this, knowing that no one has it, or somebody might say they do publicly have it together? Where are they so far?
So I wouldn't be a consultant without a little maturity model. So I think a couple of things. Firstly, one of the first decisions that people need to make is kind of, how do you see this issue? What do you want to be on this, both sort of in the short term and then maybe more aspirationally in the medium to long term? And I sort of say that there might be four options here. Firstly, do you see this just as a compliance issue? So we have some boxes to tick. We need to do some reporting. We've got some things that we need to get done, and that's us. That could be number one. Number two is then, yes, of course, we're going to do the compliance, but we also think, actually, we might have some issues to fix. We might need to do some remediation, some analysis, some remediation, to get us into better shape. Thirdly, then, there are organisations saying, actually, this is a real opportunity for us, that we want to be very proactive about how transparent things are, create that trust, to have people trust the process, and then use that as the basis for a better employer value proposition. Basically, this is a talent attraction issue, that if we can be seen to be doing a good job, create transparency, use that to create trust. It's an EVP question if we do it well. And then, at the real extreme, and for some sort of business to consumer organizations, actually, this is a potential public relations issue, that as this reporting goes out, and we found in the UK, when this requirement came in 2018 in the UK, it's the easiest story in the world for journalists to write. British Airways or your local, the equivalent of Comcast or whatever, the company that you pay money to and you don't really like them. They've just reported their gender pay gap. And so it's the easiest story in the world as this reporting comes out. And actually, for some organisations, that's a PR issue, because if that's in conflict with, for example, their brand promise, what they're saying about being ethical, for example, and they're reporting bad news from the gender pay perspective, CEO might say, actually, we think this gives us a top line revenue issue or a PR issue. So I think almost that first thing is for organizations to decide and establish and actually get agreement on, what do you see this as?
Yeah.
The legal department might see it as a compliance issue. HR might see it as EVP, but the business might see it as a public relations or a top line revenue issue. And so, yeah, what are we trying to be here in the short term and in the medium term? And does everybody agree on that? So I think almost that's the stage that a lot of organizations are at now, along with those questions of governance, like who owns this stuff? Whose responsibility ultimately is this? So almost if governance is that first step, then Sean, as you said, I mean, there's lots of work to do on things like tightening up grading. How would we explain pay differences? If someone earns 50,000, someone earns 150, why the difference? Well, obviously the big explanation is they're working at different levels, so we need to tighten up our grading. How will we explain that? There's lots of work to do around analysis. We need to get our data in the right place, get that together, get that straight, and start to do the analysis. And then many organizations talking about how we especially empower line managers, but how we communicate more generally to employees, because employees generally don't have much idea about how their pay is set, and they're going to have the right to a lot of information, and they're going to have a lot of questions. And if you don't want to be bombarded with questions, we might want to be a bit proactive about some of that education.
Yeah.
And then also, how do we enable line managers to have this conversation? Because if employees have very little understanding, line managers have very little comfort in having those sorts of conversations, and they're going to need to, because if not, HR are just going to be deluged with these questions. So that's kind of, in a bit of a nutshell, that's kind of what's going on at the moment, I think.
Yeah, I want to dig into that. Use the keyword there, right to information as well. And one thing I find, I work primarily with American companies, is, you know, it's natural when something new happens, you're trying to make it like something else that you know, right? And what I hear is a lot of people are framing EU PTD as, well, it's kind of an EEO report and it's kind of posting transparency. What I think they're missing is this right to information bit, because I hear a big difference between sort of Europeans and Americans and how they think about Article 7, the right to information, and what it is. So I guess help unpack that a bit further about why that's sort of a big part of this and how orgs need to prepare for that differently.
And while you add who, Ben, because my question on that was, you mentioned the line manager doing it, right? And so this right to information thing, do you send everyone to HR? Do you send them to a department head? Do you send them to their manager? Do you try to do it online? Because this is, my perspective is, there's going to be a deluge to start, because everyone's going to be like, cool, I have the right to access data. But I also think anytime somebody comes or goes, they're going to start doing the math and be like, oh, we just hired Paul. I have my last report. Paul, did that number go up or down because Paul got here?
Yeah, and that's where some of the implications of this get really interesting. So I'll come to that in a minute. But firstly, so I think probably the first thing to say, what EU Pay Transparency does is take everything that you would experience elsewhere. So in the UK, there is gender pay gap reporting. In parts of the US, there is posting transparency. In Australia, there is a ban on, contract clauses that prevent people talking amongst themselves about their pay. Take all of that, put a bow around it, and then put it on steroids. And that's what EU Pay Transparency does. It collects everything from everywhere in the world and takes it to the next level. So, what that means in terms of right to information. Firstly, you're going to have to tell people that they have the right to information. So just like if you're if you're doing your SOX compliance, you have to tell employees that, they can whistle blow or whatever. You have to proactively tell employees that they have this right to information. So any employee will have the right to request, obviously, their salary, which hopefully they know, compared to the average for men and women in equivalent roles. And that's a little bit up for debate. Depends on the depth of the data. Could be at the same grade, could be in the same grade, same function, for example, if you've got enough employees for that. So that is supposed to be the disinfectant to say, if we have gender pay gaps, those will be revealed. But actually what this is going to do regardless of whether you have a gender pay gap or not, half of people who make that request are going to find that they're paid less than average, for men or women, regardless if there's a gap or not. Half of people are going to find out they're paid less than average. Everyone's going to make these requests because why wouldn't you want to know? And actually, unions and works councils will be able to make those requests in bulk on behalf of employees as well. So if you have a unionised population, there's a request for everyone on day one. So actually, I mean, although the stated intent of this is to shine the light on gender pay differences, even if you don't have a gender pay gap, let's say half your employees are going to find they're paid less than average, and they're going to want to know why that is. And then, Sean, to your point, what's not clear at the moment, and what EU Pay Transparency does, the EU have basically told countries to go and make laws, and they've set the baseline. Countries are free to go further. So, for example, in the EU, what they've said is when an employee exercises that right to information, you have 60 days to respond. In Poland. Yeah, in Poland, they've just said 60, 30. So they've gone further, and and other countries could do other things still. So the EU requirement is just the baseline. Countries can go further, and I think the really interesting part there is going to be essentially what is the level of transparency. It's quite clear in principle, my right to information overrides your right to privacy, and so. If I say, if I'm the only female employee doing a certain role at a certain grade, and you say, I can't tell you the average for men and women because there's only one man, someone's going to take their employer to court, and a judge will decide at some point at the back end of this decade whether that's okay or not. I think probably a Dutch judge or a Scandinavian judge is quite likely to say, you got to tell them. A German judge may be a bit less likely. But we'll see after this is implemented. And exactly, Sean, to your example, someone leaves the organisation. I had a report from 2 weeks ago. Someone's now left the organisation. I make the request again. The company says, we're not going to tell you because that would allow you to obviously to back end the salary of the person that's left. Okay, well, I'm going to take you to court and a judge will decide whether you have to tell me or not. We don't know the outcome of that. And that is yes. That's the bit that will get really interesting once this is a bit more embedded.
I think I wouldn't say it's complete ostrich mode, but I think there are some people that are close enough on the numbers that are a little bit of ostrich mode, waiting to see what the legal precedence is on this, and what is the penalty if I don't meet 60 days to give the data. What if I do it quarterly to everybody? Well, by default, not everyone's going to get it within 60 days. I'm going to do it quarterly. Well, will that pass until there's a legal precedent to say, well, actually, everybody gets it every 90 days. They don't even have to ask. Does that fit? Doesn't fit the 60 days, but actually it's more than they want. What is it going to do? And so I think they're going to wait and see how to handle this thing. And then I think the other piece would be who gets to share that, right? So, like, do you let the employee go in and, through comp tech, go in and figure out where you click your thing and I only see it? Or do you let the manager, or there's some interesting questions.
Yeah, so I think, and I see some organizations here moving to proactivity, right? Actually moving back to, 10 years ago, lots of people doing total reward statements. Then that sort of fell out of fashion a little bit, and now it's kind of coming back because we're not going to wait for these requests from everybody and then put ourselves on the back foot. Let's just be proactive. Let's just calculate that for everybody and communicate that as part of a total reward statement and as part of some education to say, even I think your average employee probably doesn't even understand, there are such things as grades. There are decision criteria about which grade your job goes into. That grade has a salary range around it, and there's another decision criteria about where in that range you're going to be paid. Just even something as simple as that, most employees don't understand. So a lot of organizations moving towards proactivity on the numbers to head off the request around that sort of education. And then, how often are we going to do that, and how are we going to deliver it? We start to see, for example, in Workday, there is now functionality. An employee has that request. It's a bit like if you want to take next Friday off work, right? You have a request, you make a holiday request. That goes to somebody, it goes to your line manager, it goes to someone in HR who responds to that holiday request. Functionally, I think that's probably how this works. That the employee wants the information, they make the request, it goes to someone who actions it and sends the information back. This isn't like a holiday request though, is it? It's a bit more emotive. I'm quite possibly not going to like the answer. And so we might need to know a little bit about how is that going to land, because it's not just a yes or no on a holiday request. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Well, that's the big difference to me, right? Like the outcome of the transaction request is not sort of a binary or a take action. It's a template. It's an answer that is content rich. And that's one of the bits of advice we give is be thinking about what you're going to share. Is it just the averages? Is it a narrative around why the averages are what they are? Is it a definition of what equal work means for you? Like, there's a lot of thinking orgs need to do to say, like, how is this going to scale well? And it's not an outsource to your HR service center to look up some numbers, do math in Excel, and send it. Like, that is not the answer.
No, exactly. And that comes back to, sort of one of those things I was saying at the top about what do you want to be on this? Compliance is they ask the question and they get an answer. What happens with the follow-up questions? I mean, maybe we deal with that later. So compliance is one thing. EVP, as in they get an answer that lands in a really good way with the narrative, where people feel not just that they've got the answer and they've been, that there has been transparency, but also that they they trust the process.
Yeah.
That's very different. That's not just delivering an answer.
Well, I think, to your point, I try to highlight I am the least educated person on most phone calls, and I know that half the people will be upset, right? And so to your point, I think it's a great point you make, Ben, that, I think the premise was someone will get a report and be like, oh, we pay equitably. That was going to be the, cool, that was the intent, but you're like, the actual item that comes out of it will be this thing. My question to you is, are you seeing people use as much, more or less of kind of the external labor or the traditional benchmarking? Because in theory, if you're paid, you're like, oh, okay, you're paid less. And there's, I would say compensable factors. Nobody understands what that means either. That's another item, so you're paid less, but how are you compared to market? Do you want to share that? And of course, I always argue half the people do and half don't. But now you're getting into higher math, right? So are you seeing people use that data the same, different, part of the process? Because pay equity and transparency, transparency because you have to post jobs, but the pay equity piece is inherently an internal labor market analysis, not an external labor market analysis.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of work going on. I mean, with things like multi-regression to sort of say, look, what would be the reasons that two people doing the same job might be paid differently? What might all of those factors be? So, let's assume they're doing the same job, so they're at the same grade, they've got the same pay range, but they're paid differently within that. Well, that could be tenure, could be performance, could be that recruiter told me at the point of recruitment that job was particularly in demand and I had to go and pay higher for it. So it could be any number of things. So a lot of people sort of doing that analysis to say, actually, how much of these differences can we explain? And if we can explain them, then we'll be prepared to explain them. But then what the difference can't we explain, and where the difference in gender is the only explanation left, and we need to think about potentially remediating that. So we're doing quite a lot of work with organisations to get all of that data to say, what might be the things that might explain differences in pay? How do we analyse that? How do we do sort of multi-regression to work through some of that? That then gets to another interesting part, which is performance, let's say, or tenure might be a valid reason why people would be paid differently. But all of those things are also rocks to look under to say, actually, is that introducing bias into the system? So what does the bell curve of tenure look like in our organisation? And what does it look like when you disaggregate for men and women? Because if those two bell curves are in completely different places and we're using tenure to justify pay gaps, we might not be comfortable with that, because that might be one of the things that's introducing bias into the system. So so a lot of people trying to dig into sort of what sits behind that, what might be the explanation of a difference in pay, and then sharing benchmark data, a little bit more transparency around that. I mean, obviously that will come anyway, because you'll have to do that in job postings. So work that through for a couple of years. Everyone will know the benchmark data for their job anyway, because next time it gets recruited, it will be recruited with a salary range. And obviously, you guys would know better than me what's happened in the US, that often quite broad salary ranges, and then people sort of saying that's not really good enough. We need to get to.
But that's the interesting part. I mean, the transparency piece is interesting on the ranges, right? Because you have to make this strategic decision. Do I post a range that's 25 to 50 so that I don't piss everybody off that looks at it because they're looking at it, or do I post 50 to 75 or 90 so that I get the best available talent but piss everybody off inside? And how do I communicate around that? And so I'm also very curious, as they've gone through this, the HR team, the comp team has been involved a lot, right? And it's a lot of work. Luckily, I haven't had to do any of it at a company, but they're having to do it. As they go, have you seen them having to drop anything, or how do you see them dealing with the volume? Because in theory, the one thing after I won't say how many years, but a lot of years around comp and ben department, they don't get any more people or no budget. Those are the two things they don't get. So how do you see them dealing and trying to do this work now that it's months away?
Well, there is a lot of work, and obviously there are tools out there to kind of help do some of that work. I mean, this has been the big sort of off cycle, outside the comp planning and comp review cycle. I mean, it is the big piece of work that people need to be focusing on. I think when we do surveys in a couple of years' time to say, how many people tweak their benefits programs in 2026, it won't be very many, because the comp team
not the priority.
Because the comp team will have spent all of their sort of off-cycle time dealing with this, and also, I think there are a lot of, what else is a comp team doing off-cycle? Is it potentially changing the comp programs? Doesn't really make much sense to do that right now, until we've done this analysis. We've got our house in order, because why make changes that we might find are going to actually introduce more of a gap or a reporting headache? So almost kind of, this is priority number one. Let's get our heads around this issue, and that is priority number 1, 2, and 3 for comp teams. And then I think but part of the good news is that actually comp teams are able to rope in a whole host of other characters here. There is a huge job in terms of reward communication, both to employees and to line managers. Comp team on their own is not going to be able to do that. The internal comms and sort of culture, broader sort of people and culture teams are often involved in that as well. So there are plenty of other cooks in the kitchen, from legal, marketing, internal comms, finance, all interested in this as well. So
Now, the one counterpoint I would offer about the strategy change now, and I'm just curious your perspective. The counterpoint is, it doesn't land well if you find a gap and you remediate it, and the message is, well, we were underpaying you before, right? So I actually have some contacts and clients that are deliberately sort of saying, you know what, let's use this as the reason to sort of make a strategy tweak, so that could be part of our story. It's not, hey, Ben, we've been paying you less than the women, I need to give you a raise. It's, hey, we've rethought the way we are approaching the market and structuring pay. Here's your adjustment. And it's not meant to be sort of slimy or disingenuous. It's more like, it just sells a little bit better than we weren't being 100%. Fair. So there's a little 100%. Bit of strategy being a good reason to sort of make change.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. And I think even actually more tactically, I mean, the back end of last year, we were saying to organisations, you have probably two comp review cycles to essentially
make some
disguise
tweaks,
disguise remediation, and sneak that through when it doesn't look too suspicious, as part of here's our normal merit cycle. you're getting 5% in this merit cycle, and you know that some of that is merit and some of it's remediation. And you've probably got now, there's probably one shot, possibly two for some organizations, there's probably one shot now at doing that. So I think, the message that we were giving sort of 9 months or a year ago was, and actually here's, a lot of organizations, countries are still busy translating the EU requirements into their own law. And so I think a lot of organizations have been sitting on their hands for a lot of 2025 saying, well, we can't do anything. The countries haven't made clear, Hungarian government hasn't made clear what the specific requirements are going to be. So I, as a Hungarian company, can't do anything. I mean, that's not true, is it? We know 80% of what you're going to have to do. And actually, what you should be doing really is get data together now, get ahead of some of those issues, because you've got 2 comp cycles to sort of fix anything without sort of, tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, you know what, surprise, we're giving you a 10% increase for absolutely no reason at all. That's good. It's going to make people a bit suspicious, isn't it?
That's right. And while you think, oh, that's a good thing, they're getting a raise. No, it's actually, those are way harder. It's naive to think that the raise is going to smooth over. Because then it's well, how long have I been underpaid? Am I going to get that back pay? Like, all those things come up real quickly when they realize they didn't earn it. It was more they're just getting it. Yeah.
And again, it comes back to this whole kind of, if we're on compliance or on compliance plus remediation or on to creating a better employer value proposition, and there's a big gap between easy to pull someone aside and say we're giving you a 10% raise because we're remediating, that's not creating trust, it's not creating a better employer value proposition. There are other ways to do that.
How are you seeing kind of going to the tech side? So from gathering the data, putting it in a place, like where are you seeing people use, anywhere from just using, the world's #1 software provider in comp of Excel to do it all? Or, are they using Excel plus something like, Jupyter, SageMaker, whatever, if they're doing any math, or R? Are they using some of the tools that are specifically out there for pay equity? Like, I'm kind of curious to what you're seeing, because in the US, it's different because it's MNCs that are buying it, and there's some providers here. And so I'm curious if that matches up to what you're seeing in practice across a larger group.
So, let's talk about 3 types of analysis that really need to be done as part of this, right? There's some analysis for what do you have to report to the government? And that's quite simple. You could do that in Excel quite easily. That's, my average pay for all of my men, average pay for all of my women, one divided by the other. And normally that will give you something like maybe a 20 or 30% gap. So for every dollar that a man earns, on average, a woman earns 80 cents. That kind of analysis. So that's quite simple and easy to do in Excel. The right to information, again, it's not rocket science. Tell me my salary and the average for men and women at my grade level. You want that reasonably locked up, and you need a way to be able to respond to those. You need to get people the right data, not someone else's report or not the report for some other grade. So you can do that in Excel, but actually some people are looking for things a bit more industrial strength to make sure that, Fred actually gets Fred's data and reduce the ability for error. So you can do the analysis in Excel, but actually that's then more of a kind of a security. How's the right person see the right things? How do we not sort of expose that? You can imagine you could give you could give line managers a spreadsheet to say, here's all the data you need to respond to these requests.
Conversation,
you want to share the whole comp file with every line manager? Probably not. So I think people are looking for something a bit more sort of industrial strength there, particularly around permissions. And that's where, Workday have just come with functionality, as I say, to be able to, for employees to self-serve that information in Workday. Then the third thing is this kind of essentially, what are the explainable pay gaps? What are the reasons behind that, including multivariate regression, to say, if these 2 people one earns 50, one earns 150, why the difference? Well, it's because they're at different job levels. They've been in the organization different amounts of time. They're at different performance levels. And what's really driving that pay gap? How much of that pay gap can we explain with those factors, and how much is left unexplained? That's quite difficult. You can do it in Excel, but I would say the group of people who understand what the rules and requirements are, understand kind of multi-regression at a conceptual level, and can go and execute that in Excel. There aren't many people that can do all three of those things. And I'll be very transparent. I can do the first of those. I understand all the rules and the issues. I could explain multi-regression to my kids, but I can't go and execute that in Excel. I have friends who understand it at a conceptual level and can do it in Excel. They have no idea about the rules. So it's then quite difficult for me to mark their homework if they build me a spreadsheet. So that's often where people are saying, you know, let's look at some tools to do that. Obviously, I would be remiss to say Korn Ferry have a tool to do it, but Bcom, Syndio, lots of others out there in the market.
Yeah.
And then so that bit of analysis is quite hard to do in Excel, and then especially when you come to remediation, because when you're remediating, there's a moving target. So if I decide, Paul, that all of a sudden you're paid, you know, way below everybody else, and there's 10,000 of that we can't explain, and so I'm going to remediate your pay by 10,000, I've just increased the average pay, and I've just potentially created outliers elsewhere. So remediation in Excel, you can then go into ever decreasing circles, ever decreasing iterations of what is the last dollar that I need to spend to close these gaps without spending a dollar too much. Again, very hard in Excel. And so that's what, you know, and so that's what some of the more sort of industrial strength tools are getting used for.
Yeah.
And if you're getting one of those, they can also then do the other stuff. They can also do the reporting requirements and everything else. Even though that's quite easy in Excel.
Yeah.
Even the comp planning, to your point of ever decreasing circles, right? The problem with comp planning, not having comp planning software and having those guidelines and having it tied together is you can even give it down to the line managers or whatever, but that doesn't gender, like all the other stuff goes in, and then you come back, and now how many times you have to send, you know, an Excel file back and forth, and the manager's like, I already did this, and you're trying to explain, well, these other people in another department are in your grade, like, you know, they're like, I don't care, please make the problem go away. So I think the math has become exceedingly more complicated, and I think part of the complication is across who would normally have that line of sight. And so it's not like, hey, Paul, let me sit down with you and talk about what this is for your group. I also have to somehow explain to you that Ben's group is causing your group problems, and you can't do, like, that's the difficult part.
Yeah. And we don't plug often, but I'm going to do a little one here. Sorry. Just because the tech ecosystem is something I care a lot about. I think one observation is that there are many players. Anybody can go to comptech.novoinsights.com and sort of see our landscape, but it's really important to know what you want to be before you start to pick the tech, would be my plug. So if you just want to do the math, there's a different list of companies you should talk to. If you need to remediate, there's a subset of those can handle it. If you need support other than like your HCM or HRIS for right to information requests and workflow management, there's a different set some cases than the first two. So start with the problem you need to solve, and then identify the providers that can solve those problems. Because as much as this has been out there, it's still I would say it's still relatively immature tech ecosystem around it. I met a new player that just launched like 2 months ago, right? Like there's new providers coming out because this is going to be it is a big deal. So much traction is there, but the tools are still catching up to the requirement in some cases. So you just got to be smart about what's your priority and who's going to fit that need.
Yeah, and almost I think back to something I said a little bit earlier, I mean, let's say we at Korn Ferry, we would see 4 things to this. Firstly, there's governance, and you know, quite often people need help to figure out what is the governance, what are we trying to be, how do we think that through, how do we get alignment on it. That's the first thing. Secondly, lots of organizations need to tighten up grading, and so you know, there's potentially a whole piece of work there. Then thirdly, you've got analysis, and so all of those tools are really in that sort of third bucket around how do we actually do the analysis. And I quite often say, you know, in our tool, I mean, Korn Ferry didn't invent maths, didn't invent multi-regression. It's, you know, math is maths, right? But you know, we're one of a few tools that can do that, and our maths is the same as anyone else's. And then the fourth thing is that sort of communication. Like, how are you going to solve you know, it's not just about it would be a mistake to think because it's called pay transparency, that just goes into the comp box then. No, it's about all sorts of other things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole thing can be summed up to, because again, I'm, being the least educated one, I'll go back and quote Cheshire Cat. If you don't know where you're going, all roads will lead you there. And I think it comes back to your initial piece, Ben, around like, what do you want this to be? And then I've always said kind of getting your shit together first before you figure it out, what tools you need. And so it's kind of like, what do I want this to be when I'm done? What's my goal? And then what do I have? Do I have people who can do math? Does my goal align with having to do the deep math? Do I, get all that stuff lined up and then kind of with purpose move through and purchase those? Because the example I use a lot, Ben, I've seen companies here that start talking and they're like, before they even have their act together, they're like, Sean, like, I don't know if I want to use log linear regression or Blender Oaxaca regression. And like, as a nerd, I would love to chat for hours on the two difference. Like, I love that stuff, but I'm like, you might
have some questions you want to answer before that.
Yeah, you have many questions. Like, and actually, it doesn't matter. Like, actually, to your point, the math is the math. I mean, it matters. The answer will be different. But you know how different? Not enough if you don't have all your the thing that you mentioned, Ben, about the maths being the maths. If you put in the wrong numbers at the beginning, everyone will spit out the wrong answer. All the math is the same. So to your point of, do I have the right grades? Do I have the right numbers? Is the data governance there? Tenure, I always talk about where, if you don't go back and look, and why did everyone get hired on May 1st, 2021? Well, that's when we launched Workday. Like, well, that you can't use tenure now. Right? Tenure's not going to work for this. So there's a lot of stuff that isn't nearly as fun and as sexy as multivariate regression. Yeah, I said multivariate regression is sexy. Don't get me wrong. But like, there's not as much.
I agree.
There's just work that has to be done.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think as you say, the math is the commodity, and I think actually one thing that a lot of organisations in Europe are finding is that what has been done in the past, I think some organisations have done analysis and they've done it from a very I don't want to say defensive, but sort of let's essentially have 300 pages of statistical outputs of all sorts of intersectional multivariate regression analysis on pay gaps. And that means I can have a 300-page report from a Big Four or someone or some actuaries on my desk. And if anyone comes and asks me about pay gaps, I can push that across the desk and say, here are 300 pages of statistics that you're not going to understand, but go away. We've done this analysis, okay? And I'm working with a few, especially US organizations, now getting to grips with EU Pay Transparency, because that's what they had been doing in the past, but now it needs to be actionable. People need to understand it and not need a PhD in statistics to understand it. So actually, with transparency, we need to help all of our employees understand how much they're paid, not essentially sort of hide behind lots of statistically very complex analysis. And that completely changes the game, because if you need to explain it and you need to make it understandable, actually some of the tools that you need are then very different. That it's not a big, even if you could do it in Excel, a very big Excel spreadsheet model. How are you going to get that out to line managers and actually have them have conversations and take action based on this if no one understands it? So
your point of pay, man, I think that point of your point of pay band, half people are going to say they're underpaid, so you have to even translate compensation terms into human.
Right.
Everyone's
like that. Above average, and everyone's above average, right? So they should. Yeah. Why would I not be paid right at the top of my pay band?
Yeah. Well, that's why every time I say, your merit budget's 3%, what does every one of your company think you're going to get? And a lot of people will be like, well, 3%. I'm like, nobody thinks they're getting 3%. Everybody thinks they're getting more than 3 because somebody else is going to make up for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is the complicated, and the thing that is interesting in all this is you have this remediation and all this stuff, but you still have ongoing business and how do I pay performers and how do I do stuff? And so to me, the exponential complexity to all this is it's not done in a vacuum while you're still trying to bring in the best talent, pay your best performers, do other things. Like, we're adding work while the plane is going, flying, flying.
Right. I think actually an interesting thing for the comp profession is I think this changes the way that you all of us need to sort of work in future, because actually at the aggregate level, we are going to have to analyze and account for and answer for these pay gaps. And so we might want to get a little bit more involved in some of the decisions on the ground, that we give someone a pay range, they have a bit of latitude, and we might want to have a little bit of sign off on that, because when you roll that up in aggregate across the whole year of all these decisions being made on the ground, we're going to have to answer for the pay gaps that creates. So do we want to be a little bit more activist in actually sort of signing off those decisions at the point of decision, rather than seeing the problem rolled up at the end of the year?
I think the silver lining is going to be TA is going to like come a little closer and start working with comp a little more. Like I know we had, we talked to Paul with someone you worked with before in TA. Like that's a little more rare than it is where TA, because that's where it starts, right? You can only fix it two places in time, at the beginning and then at the merit cycle generally, right? And so the beginning, in the past they could shake their hands, but I think now there's going to be enough data to be like, you actually have to come to us and say, I know you want to offer more money to get them on board, but like you can't go above this number. You just legit can't go above this number, because more players will be involved. Legal will be involved. CFO will be involved. They're like, wait, what? Yeah, it's not. It's going to be different than just pissing off the comp person. It's going to be.
Or essentially, you can go back to the football analogy that if you give the star player $500,000. Well, there are all sorts of other people who are on contracts that say, I need to be the highest paid player at the club, or I need to be on 75% of what the highest paid player is. So if you take the highest paid player from $500,000 to $1 million, that has knock-on effect. You bring in someone on 150K, actually we've created an immediate issue, and we now need to remediate this person for another 15.
Yeah.
I mean, that needs to be in your hiring budget.
Well, that's for another day, as I've talked about, if you actually get pay equity right and you have your people there, what if I want to upskill a department? The cost now to do that has become exponential, because I don't just bring in somebody here, I have to move everyone else up, to your point. And so the math becomes, it's just math, but it becomes more complicated across the areas. So we always ask.
Is it?
It's a lot math. Yeah, well, you go to tell the kids.
Math's no longer mathing.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So I always ask at the end, doesn't have to be pay equity, and you've been around, what is one thing, if you could fix one thing in HR, what would it be? If you could automagically, a highly technical term.
I think still for a lot of, I have some great experiences as a consumer in, really seamless experiences, buying stuff, getting it delivered, dealing with the company that sold it to me, and servicing and that kind of thing. And I think we very rarely try and give our employees that same experience. That if you think about the best customer service sort of organizations that are that are known for being flawless and seamless in the customer experience, we don't spend a fraction of that amount of time thinking, actually, how do we do that for our employees? So I'd fix that. Easier said than done.
Yeah.
No, but I gave you the blue skies, rainbows, and unicorns universe in which to do that. So I like that.
Perfect.
Actually, like of that answer, I think one of the interesting things is maybe subtlety to that, Ben, was you weren't saying be the best. Like, don't go look at the best HR experienced person that delivering it. You actually said go a little bit more macro and say, what is like the best experience I've had, and make that my goal, as opposed to kind of being the best of the League 3. I want to be the best of the Premier League, thing.
No, exactly. Think about the best customer experiences you've had, and how do we as HR create that for our employees?
This has been great. I really appreciate it. As you can tell, Ben can talk on this for a long time, knows a ton. You can find him. We'll post it. You can find his information and reach out as you go. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. And I know we did this in, getting near the end of your day, forcing you to have a little longer day today. So I really appreciate your time.
All good. Thanks for having me. It was nice to talk to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
See you.